The engine bay held its breath at night. Down here on the lower decks, the fusion cores ran in cycles the rest of the ship ignored, their hum a low and constant thing, closer to feeling than sound. Exposed wiring panels lined the walls in rows, each one glowing a faint violet where the power bled through imperfect seals. The floors were dark with machine oil that no one had bothered to scrub in months. The emergency lights burned red along the ceiling, and in that red and violet mix, on everything looked like the inside of something alive. Queen Lyria stood at the central console, her fingers resting on cold metal. She was not reading the gauges. She had not come down here to read gauges. She had come, as she always came, because the engine bay was the one place on this vessel where no member of her court had ever followed, and because the machinery was loud enough, in its quiet way, to fill the particular quality of silence she carried inside her chest. And the Velianthi were a bioluminescent species. Their freckles, pale white constellations scattered across their skin, responded to the body's interior weather without permission and without apology. Shame dimmed them, grief dimmed them, the particular suffering of being unwanted for long enough that the body forgot what wanting felt like. That dimmed them too. Lyria's freckles had been fading for years. Her court had stopped looking at her face directly. They said it was deference. She knew it was discomfort. For 2 years now, her face had been almost entirely dark. An old coat hung on a wire hook near the secondary core. It had been there when she first found this place, left behind by some previous crew member who had transferred off the ship and apparently decided the coat wasn't worth carrying. Human-sized, heavy canvas, the color of something that had once been green. It gathered dust in the red-violet light. She had never touched it. She didn't know why she kept looking at it. 11 years. That was how long it had been since anyone had touched her. Not formally, not accidentally, not at all. After the Thalvari Accord collapsed and her people withdrew into their diplomatic silence, physical contact with non-Velianthi had become politically untenable, and her own court had learned, through a series of increasingly careful interactions, that the queen did not wish to be approached. She had told them this. She had meant it. And then, now she stood in an engine bay at 3 in the morning, counting the freckles she could no longer see, and wondering if meaning something and needing something could live in the same body without destroying each other. The machinery hummed. She pressed her palm flat against the console and felt nothing warm. Elias Thorne came in at 03:14, which was when his shift started, which was when it always started. Oh, because the night cycle maintenance schedule had not changed in the 8 months he'd been posted to this vessel, and Elias was not the kind of man who arrived early or late when on time would do. He was 42, wiry in the way of men who had spent their lives in tight spaces with their arms over their heads, and his fingers were permanently stained with grease in the creases that soap couldn't reach anymore. A tool belt rode low on his hips the way it always had, the clasp slightly loose, with the whole assembly a comfortable weight he'd stopped noticing years ago. There was a tattoo on his left forearm, faded to the color of an old bruise, from a shipyard on a station he hadn't thought about in a long time. He came in, set his kit down by panel 7, and saw her. He registered. Woman, tall, standing at the central console, very still, dressed in something pale gray that had no business being in an engine bay. He registered a half-second later that the silver circlet in her midnight blue hair was the kind of thing that meant something official. He looked back at panel 7. He opened his kit, took out a junction probe, began the first diagnostic. The tool belt clinked once against the conduit housing, loud in the quiet of the bay, and he heard nothing from the woman at the console, which meant she was either very composed or very far away, inside her own head. In his experience, people who stood that still at 3 in the morning were usually the second one. He worked through the first panel without speaking. She did not move. An electrician had no business noticing the Queen's untouched skin in the engine bay, the way her hands lay flat on cold metal and never curled, the way her body held itself at a careful distance from everything, including its own surface, as though she had forgotten what it felt like to be inside it. But he noticed. He moved to panel 8, and the junction there had a faulty secondary relay, which he'd flagged 3 nights ago and which the repair requisition system had, in its infinite bureaucratic grace, not yet approved. He could fix it anyway. He usually did. The paperwork would catch up eventually, and the relay didn't care about paperwork. He crouched, opened the panel cover, and set it quietly on the floor beside him. From here she was closer, not close enough to be intrusive, but close enough that he could see, right in the violet bleed of the wiring, that the freckles on her arms were nearly dark. He knew what Valianthi freckles meant. Everyone on a mixed crew vessel learned eventually, the same way you learned which corridor lights flickered and which cargo bay smelled like something had died in the ventilation. Basic operational awareness. Dim freckles meant something was wrong inside the person wearing them. He thought about saying something. He thought about not saying something. He straightened up. He looked at her. Just once. The way you look at a wire you're about to touch. Not to admire it, but to understand where it runs. "Good morning," he said. Not warmly, not coldly. The way you said it to someone in a corridor at an hour when you'd both rather be asleep. An acknowledgement that the world was still turning and you were both, against all reasonable odds, still in it. After he said it the way he said it to the cargo loader on deck 4 and the night cycle cook and the junior engineer, who always seemed surprised to see another human being before sunrise. He said it like it was nothing. Then he went back to the relay. Somewhere in the machinery, the hum shifted almost imperceptibly, the way it did when the load balanced out, and the red light over the secondary core steadied. The old coat on the hook near the wall caught the light for a moment and held it. She had not moved. Her hands were still flat on the console. Her freckles were still dark, but her head had turned, just slightly, just enough, toward the sound of his voice. Her breathing stopped. Her fingers stopped their absent tracing of the console's edge. The engine hum dropped, somewhere in the architecture of her attention, to nothing at all. She stood with the stillness of something that has been struck by a frequency it didn't know its body could receive. The coat on its wire hook hung motionless between them in the red light. Her fingers hovered. 11 years of practiced distance held in the space between one breath and the next. Neither of them moved for 9 full seconds. Tomorrow night, this ship carries another story. One that begins in a quieter place, with a heavier kind of silence. Come back and stay a while. She did not answer him. This was not remarkable to Elias. Plenty of people didn't answer. The cargo loader on deck 4 had never once responded to good morning in 8 months, and Elias had continued saying it anyway, because the alternative was silence, and silence at 0314 felt like something you could drown in slowly if you let it. He finished the relay, logged the fix on his handheld without the paperwork's permission, moved to panel 9. The next night he came in at 0314. She was there, same position, hands on the console. The pale gray silk of whatever she wore catching the violet light at the edges. Freckles dark, the coat on its hook gathering its patient dust. "Good morning," he said. Went to panel 9. Opened it, worked. She didn't answer. He didn't expect her to. The third night, something shifted in the quality of her stillness. He couldn't have named it precisely. It was the difference between a wire that was cold because the circuit was dead and a wire that was cold because the current hadn't reached it yet. Both looked the same. Only one of them was waiting. He said good morning and crouched by the panel and did not look at her again, because he was a man who understood, at a cellular level, that some things needed to be approached sideways or not at all. On the fourth night, one freckle lit on her left cheekbone. Just one. Small, pale white. Hoyer a single point of light in the dark topography of her face. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds and then faded. But it had been there. He caught it at the edge of his vision and said nothing and kept his eyes on the wiring. On the 7th night, she spoke. "Why do you say that?" Not a question. The syntax was flat, genuinely confused. The way someone sounds when they encounter a custom so foreign that their language doesn't have a proper shape for it. Elias considered the junction splice he was threading. Say what? That, the morning thing. He thought about it honestly for a moment. Habit, I guess. My dad did it. His dad before him. He shrugged, though she couldn't see the shrug from where she stood. Seems like the right way to start. A silence. Then, start what? And he looked up at her then, just briefly, the way he'd looked before, the way you look at a wire to understand where it runs. The day, he said. Sure, just the day. He set down the splice tool and picked up the junction probe and said almost to himself, studying the read on the display, I see where to cut. He was talking about the wiring. He was entirely and only talking about the wiring, about the corroded section of the tertiary feed that had been bleeding voltage for probably 6 weeks before anyone noticed. He said it the way he said everything, matter-of-factly, without drama, the words just the shape of what he was seeing. But the freckles on her arms lit up, not one, not 3, a cascade, beginning at her wrists and traveling upward, pale white points of light blooming in sequence, like something that had been held underwater for a very long time, and had finally, in one unguarded moment, broken the surface. She looked down at her own arms. He kept his eyes on the panel. The Valianthi had no word for what he had done. Their language contained elaborate frameworks for formal acknowledgement, for rank salutation, if for the precise gradations of respect owed between species and stations. It did not contain a word for the thing a person did when they greeted you every morning, simply because you were alive and present, and it was morning, and that seemed like enough reason. Liraya's mind moved through its categories and found nothing. And in that gap where language failed, something else moved instead. Something older and less articulate. Something that had been very quiet for 11 years. Her hand moved before she decided to move it. Reached out, not toward him, but toward the coat on the hook beside the secondary core. Her fingers closed on the collar. She lifted it from the hook, and the weight of it surprised her. Heavier than it looked, carrying the particular density of things that have been still for a long time. She held it for a moment, then without entirely understanding why, she settled it over her own shoulders. The canvas was cold at first. Then it was warm. The cleaning crew, it should be noted, filed a formal complaint that week about the presence of human grease stains on a Zelkari-rated engine surface, citing Regulation 7.4 of the Interspecies Vessel Maintenance Code. The complaint was processed, stamped, and filed in the archive where formal complaints went to be forgotten. Nobody explained to the cleaning crew what the stain actually was. It seemed unnecessarily complicated. Morning 12. Elias came in at 03:14, set his kit down, turned. She was already there but different. The coat was on her shoulders, worn with the casual ownership of something claimed. Her freckles, all of them, burned steady white pale in the violet light of the bay, her face luminous in a way her court had not seen in 2 years, in a way that had sent 3 separate advisors to the ship's physician that week, convinced the environmental lighting had malfunctioned. She watched him cross the floor. "Good morning," he said. Her freckles held. Orna, and the thing that happened in her chest. She had no word for that either, but she had stopped trying to find one. Some things didn't need naming. Some things only needed to keep happening, morning after morning, in the red and violet dark, until they became the shape of the day itself. 3 weeks later, a junior engineer doing inventory in her private quarters noted, with some confusion in his log, a battered canvas coat hanging on a permanent hook beside the viewport. The collar was worn soft. It smelled faintly of engine oil and something else he couldn't identify. The Queen, the log noted, was particular about it. It was not to be moved. She counted them now, the mornings. 12 had been the one where she stopped holding her breath. This story will stay with you, or it already has. Come back tomorrow. Another human, another queen, another quiet thing that changes everything.